Welcome to this episode of the Erasing Shame podcast. My name is DJ Chuang. Thank you for tuning in, whether by audio or video. You are hearing my voice. It is so great to be back behind the microphone. Happy New Year 2025. And I want to share with you that this episode will be a special promotion of an upcoming online event, because we have to talk about erasing the shame for those who have been spiritually abused. So this is an online summit that's coming up next week, January 21st to the 25th. And I got to meet the producer and founder of this nonprofit and podcast and this summit online event that is happening next week. Brian Lee, he is Korean American, son of a pastor, and he has had some life experience with spiritual abuse and trauma. And as he's gone through his own healing journey, he's also become a healer to help others to recover and to heal and make sense of all the confusion and complexity involved with spiritual abuse and trauma. And there is hope and there is healing, and well, there's also shame. And perhaps in the future, as he's available and gets recovery from running this summit, we will have him join us for a conversation here at Erasing Shame. And as we mentioned briefly on the previous episode with Sonia Lee, there's a lot that happens with abuse, whether it's a family context or a church context where it's spiritual. And spiritual abuse can happen in non-church contexts because there's other kinds of religions and spirituality as well, not to mention cults where the abuse is just obvious. And one thing that stood out in my conversation with Brian, I actually met him online and in person. We were both at the Common Table Network conference hosted at Biola University, which is becoming an annual gathering for congregational wellness and clergy wellness. I'll add a link in the show notes at erasingshame.com if you would be interested in that topic, or you might know someone that would be interested in that topic, whether for your pastor, a pastor you know, or your church, or other churches you know. And I want to mention some of the sessions that will be featured by speakers that you can listen to on demand and perhaps on the live bonus sessions. I don't have the entire program in front of me. It's at the website brokentobeloved.org/summit. The link will be in the show notes, brokentobeloved.org/summit. And they've got sessions. The first one jumped right out at me, breaking free from shame. There you go. That's so in line with what we're trying to do. We've been doing for 6 years now here at Erasing Shame. A couple of the topics I'll mention: creating a culture of protection in your church, how is unresolved trauma impacting you, finding family after leaving a high-control church, returning to community after spiritual abuse, and so many more. And now I'm going to segue and introduce Brian Lee. This is directly from his podcast, and he's given me permission to share it with you here. It's an audio podcast, so I've taken some liberty to grab some images from his IG, which stands for Instagram, so that those of you that are watching the video version of this can watch and see some of the promotional material about the summit. And in this preview of the summit, I'm sharing with you 2 of the clips of conversations he's had with 2 speakers there. One from Adam Young, Those of you that are podcast fans, you'll recognize his name from his popular podcast about storytelling. And then Janai Alman is the second clip. You'll hear the entire episode of the Summit preview is episode number 32. I'll add a link in the show notes where it also includes a segment with Dr. Kurt Thompson, the author of the book Soul of Shame, along with numerous other ones, and another person that I forget at the moment, but I'll add a link in the show notes at erasingshame.com so that you can listen to the entire episode of the Summit preview so you can know why it is valuable for you and for others that you know, and even people you don't know that have experienced different levels or different degrees of spiritual abuse. And here's what makes it so important to talk about, because it's not talked about. Those who are abused in a spiritually oppressive or spiritually abusive environment, sometimes they don't even know it. And then secondly, because there's such a power dynamic that it is hard to address, it is hard to speak about. There's so many layers of complication. There's not only the spiritual, there's the theological, there's the relational, there's the mental health aspect, there's the emotional aspect, the relational aspect. And so much of our lives, when you're in a spiritual community, it's all interweaved and it's really hard to untangle. And Brian shared the statistics with me, and that is so eye-opening. That people estimate that 1 in 6 people have experienced some kind of spiritual abuse. And then when he shared that with me, I gasped. And then I also said that might be underreported because some people don't know they're spiritual abused. Surveys are often inaccurate. You add and subtract the ones that might be exaggerating. I would not be surprised. It feels like an underreporting to me. So spiritual abuse, what a terrible thing that happens under the name of God, giving Jesus Christ a bad reputation because bad people are associated with that. Even some church leaders. And here's a thought before we cut over to Brian's preview session about the summit. And Jesus warned us that there will be wolves in sheep clothing among us. And you know what? Those may well be pastors of churches out there, even popular ones. I'll leave it at that. Now here is a clip from Brian Lee's podcast, Broken to Beloved. And I would love to see you at the summit next week. Register at brokentobeloved.org/summit. Links will be in the show notes for the complete episode. Here's Brian.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Broken to Beloved podcast. I hope to provide practical resources through compassionate conversations to move toward healing and wholeness. Our third annual summit launches next Tuesday, and I'm so excited to share these sessions with you. Today, I'm going to give you a sneak preview of what you can expect, including some clips from a few different sessions. Don't forget to register so you get all of these sessions at brokentobeloved.org/summit. The first clip I want to share is from my session with Adam Young. Adam is a therapist and host of the very popular The Place We Find Ourselves podcast, and he has a strong focus on story work. I loved my conversation with him as we discussed the impact of investigating our own past stories to find freedom in the present. Here's the clip. You say that often kind of the deepest places of shame can also be our biggest moments of freedom, or the kind of the pathway through those moments to find freedom. Tell us about that, because that was intriguing to me.
Sure. Well, the nature of shame is that a story cannot be told publicly. The nature of shame is that if I told you what happened to me, you would not want to be in relationship with me any longer. So shame is essentially a social experience. It is about my relationship with you. It is about, if you know this about me, will you welcome me and will you want to be in relationship with me, or will you turn your face and your body away from me in exclusion? That's the pernicious experience of shame. It is being turned away from, excluded, because there's something about me that is unbearable and unlovely. So none of us are inclined to enter our stories of shame and tell them to ourselves, much less tell them to another person. The dilemma with that is what I started with. A story that is untold is a story that has you bound in shame. And the way out of shame is by exposing the truth of the story to the light. However, you need to be very judicious with who is worthy of hearing your stories of shame. This is not for public consumption. It's not for the public to know. It's for a few trained, wise guides who have done their own work and who have not gifting, but character. Those are the people that are worthy of hearing one or two of your stories. And the only way to start is by sharing one with someone or someones that you feel like have earned the right, by the way they have chosen to live their life, to hear one of the most painful places of shame in your heart. Once you can risk that, then it's, what's this experience like for you, sharing this story? How is the other person taking you in? What are they doing with that 12-year-old girl? What are they doing with that 15-year-old boy? How are they engaging you? And what's that like for your body to be in their presence?
Yeah. And say more about that, because so much of the storytelling feels like a very intellectual and emotional exercise in remembering it, writing it down, kind of mining the feelings that were in that moment, or remembering the, like you're saying, the particularities of it. So then the what you're saying about engaging and all of these things are being in your body. Tell us more about that.
Well, to be in your body is simply to feel your feelings as you are telling the story of the 12-year-old girl. So if you have a history, for example, of sexual abuse that happened between the ages of 12 and 15, it was with your grandfather, it was over the summer. To step into one of those incidents and to tell the story on the ground level with details, in other words, where it happened, how he moved you into a place of, we could say, trust, and not only trust, but wanting to be in the goodness of his presence, because all abusers groom their victims. And the way they groom them is with goodness, with kindness, with a taste of the love of God. And so to tell the story is to tell about what that looked like for you when you were 13 years old, the summer of your 8th grade year, at your grandfather's house for that 2-week vacation. And to tell it with details. When you do that, you will find that you are automatically thrust into your body, feeling a lot of the feelings that you felt when you were 13. And if you can do that with a trained, wise, caring guide, whether that's a trained therapist, a friend, a coach, I could care less what their credentials are. I'm interested in their character and if they've done their own work. And if they have, then that person's reaction to hearing your story is going to affect your nervous system. It will provide, hopefully, some regulation for those places where you get terrified or enraged or feel deep shame. To regulate a dysregulated body is a gift. It's the gift of presence. It's the gift of containment. It's the gift of kindness. And now it is not merely that I am telling you my story. It is far more that together we are arriving at a more truthful telling of what happened that day.
Yeah. Yeah. To regulate a dysregulated body is a gift.
Yes.
I love that.
And it is one of the most important gifts that primary caregivers give to their children, hopefully, if you grew up in a loving, caring home. The best, and by best I mean the most neurobiologically significant gift that a caregiver gives to a child is regulation of their dysregulated body. In other words, when you're a toddler, when you're an infant, when you're 12 years old, your body gets anxious, it gets afraid, it gets sad, it gets listless, it gets shut down. We go through shifts in affect all the time. And we need, as children, adults that can help regulate us when we're dysregulated, because we don't have the necessary brain structures to self-regulate yet.
Yeah. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the gift of that attunement, right?
Yes.
Of coming into the world looking for someone, looking for us, that would lead to a secure attachment.
That's it.
It's so beautiful. And yet it's so, I don't want to say rare, but it feels rare for people in these communities, right? So what do we do with those stories? And we try to tell them to someone who is worthy, who can attune to us as we tell that story in order to offer that gift of regulation. And then there are two options, right? They receive it well, they offer that attunement and regulation, or they reject it, or they gaslight us, or whatever it is, and then we feel further pushed into our shame.
Yes, that's right.
What happens then?
What happens when your story is not received well? Well, first of all, may it be when you tell your story, you need to have enough honor for the boy or girl in that story that you do not let the process continue going on if you don't, in Dan Siegel's words, feel felt. If you're not attuned to, if the other person is not with you in the story, then you just stop and realize this was a mistake. This person is not able to hear my story. And I have enough honor for the boy or the girl in the story to stop giving them access. And that's okay. That's just, hey, you didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that will be really empowering for a lot of people who hear that, who are used to fawning or used to white knuckling their way through or used to trying harder through things. To say, I am allowed to stop telling my story. I don't owe it to anybody, right? Especially to someone I don't feel safe with. I can't wait for you to hear the rest of that. Next, we'll hear from Janai Alman. This is her third time speaking at our summit, and she's been a favorite speaker and good friend. It's been so fun to watch the history and progression over the last 3 years, and here's a clip from this year's session.
And I had a hard relationship with her on the church staff. I will also say the church staff was toxic, so we were trying to work within a toxic relationship. And I remember thinking, you're being hard on me right now, but you're also being really hard on you right now.
Yeah. Yep.
And so things like the Enneagram give you language. And that's like my whole thing, is giving people language so that they can name the things that are fractured or what's wrong or what's off or what's different. And it gave me language so that I could be empathetic to someone who was being really, really hard on me. It's also giving me language. So whenever I name the insecurity in my pastor, he didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
And while that doesn't absolve him from all the harm that he did, it makes me see him as human.
Yes.
And it means that I will not dehumanize him in the ways that he's dehumanized me.
Yes.
And so in acknowledging his insecurity, in acknowledging that internal family systems would say that there is an inner child that just never healed and that there are parts of you trying to protect, I see that in the people that harmed me the most. There are these inner child, that this fear, and I think so much of it is fear-based, or our lack of identity, or our whole, we have no identity because we've run from a lot, like our fears. You can't really, to do identity work, to do boundary work, you have to have a sense of curiosity, and you can't be curious when you're constantly surviving or in survival mode. When you're in fight or flight, if someone's about to punch you, you don't have time to think about like, why is he punching me? Why is the world the way that it is? You just have to dodge out of the way. You know what I mean? And so I speak specifically to identity, and not that I have a prescription for anyone, but begin to be curious about who you are. What makes you tick? What are your fears? One thing that I learned from the Enneagram in particular, and I'm more fluent in the Enneagram than anything else, but if there's another framework that works for you, please pursue that. I learned that I have a really heavy dose of fear toward being abandoned. And so because I didn't want to be abandoned, I would cross my own boundaries often. I would lose my sense of self so that I would kind of fit into the mold of whatever they needed me to be, just so that I wouldn't be left behind. And so my own identity work meant, what do I need to do to help heal this particular insecurity? In my fear of being abandoned, what ended up happening is I abandoned and betrayed myself over and over and over again. And that fractures your sense of identity more than anything else. But your identity is actually rooted, I always go back to Genesis, your identity is rooted in being very good. You were wanted. Everyone on this world is wanted. So if you struggle with being wanted, I want you to know you are wanted. If not by anyone else in your life, there are people in the world who want you here. And that's kind of the work of spiritual direction, is reminding yourself that in spiritual direction, there's you, the spiritual director, and technically there should be a third chair that's supposed to represent God. God wants you there also. And so what do you like about yourself? Do you even like yourself? Do you even know what it means? If you can't befriend yourself, how can you befriend other people? How can you truly love your neighbor as yourself if you think that you only deserve to be walked all over? And I think for people who are abuse and trauma survivors, abuse and trauma break down the sense of self. You are nothing. You are no one. What's yours is technically someone else's. They exploit you. They use you. They hoard your resources, which is why the substance and mental, or just the SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, one of their tenets of trauma-informed care is empowerment. So kind of going back to the idea of, it's not that we are without power. Everyone has power. It's about re-empowering somebody so that they remember that they have voice and choice, because they've been so conditioned to believe what's theirs isn't really theirs anymore. But I love the whole shift toward embodied spirituality that I think many of us are kind of experiencing just in the general Christian cultural moment, because it brings us back to a sense of incarnate being. Like if our bodies didn't matter, then why did Jesus come into the world in a body and he was with us? And so anyway, the sense of identity, and I'm going to speak particularly kind of just juxtaposed to how we holistically, briefly, but our identity has a lot to do with our self-esteem. Self-esteem is, do I like myself? Do I not like myself? I do like myself. Are there ways that I need to grow? Yes. But I like that I like to learn. I like that I like to be challenged. I like that whenever I encounter discomfort, I've given myself space to heal such that I can actually name, is this discomfort a lack of safety? Meaning, are the people that are around me, is my environment unsafe? Or is this discomfort an invitation to grow? Because often, when you are in survival or even for I would say for my former pastor, there were a lot of discomforting moments on our church staff that I think he perceived as a lack of safety, meaning we were ready to attack him when really it was an invitation for him to grow. And I said that with him. I don't want you to just figure this out all by yourself. I'm actually telling you that I'm willing to walk with you which is bananas because women can't be pastors in my former church. And the fact that I was pastoring him this much was just, I mean, it was just bananas. But like this idea that like discomfort can be good challenge. And I don't perfectly name my safety or my opportunities to grow every time, but I'm getting better. And so I'm getting better at that because I know who I am. You can't have boundaries. You can't have effective boundaries if you don't know who you are. Like if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what is it's so funny. I had someone, there have been language that I've found in other folks that where the language of boundaries has been leveraged to abuse other people. Like this is my boundary. And because this is my boundary, I need you to do this. And that's not boundary work at all. Boundary work is an inside game. So boundary work is acknowledging this is what I'm responsible for. And this is what I'm not responsible for. I do not carry this for someone else. You can't have effective relationships, or you can still have relationships, but you're going to experience fractured relationships when you don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Or if you, and this may resonate with a lot of folks, if you become somebody different in different spaces to keep the people in power happy. That is not at all something God, there's a scripture that Paul says, I become all things to all people. I don't think that means losing your sense of self. It means like meeting people with where they're at, and you can still bring your authentic self to where people are at. But maybe because of their own story that they lived, you can't discuss politics with this person, or you can't discuss something else with this person. You just you're meeting people with where they're at. You're not becoming something totally different. Obviously, Paul was writing, this different cultural moment. There's things that are lost in translation, but I don't think that he's advocating that you lose entirely who you are, that you lose your sense of calling, or like Paul never lost his sense of calling to meet people with where they're at. So I think that is the work of boundaries, responsibilities. And whenever you meet all of those things, you can belong. Like when you embody who you are, when you're allowed to show up with who you are, when you are free to share, these are my responsibilities, this is my work and my calling, and people acknowledge that even though it's different, only then can you really start building a sense of belonging.
I can't wait for you to hear these full sessions, as well as all of our other amazing speakers. When you register, you'll get an email each day with a link to 3 or 4 sessions a day with 36 hours to watch them. You'll hear from author and Bible teacher Kate Boyd, therapist and author Chuck DeGroat, disability advocate Christopher Stewart, attorney Robert Callahan, relationship coach Mary B. Seyfried, emotions coach Becky Castle-Miller, and so many more. We'll cover topics like internal family systems, finding community and family again after leaving high control cultures, navigating abuse in faith spaces, creating cultures of protection, and how unresolved trauma impacts us, our faith, our relationships, and lots more. During the week of the summit, I'll be hosting some live bonus sessions on healthy sexuality after purity culture with authors and therapists Dr. Camden Morganti and Sam Jolman. Maybe recording a live podcast and conversation with Amy Fritz, host of the Untangled Faith podcast, and providing an update on the Spiritually Abusive Leadership and Climate Survey, which so many of you took with organizational psychologist Liana Chang. We'll also be getting together for some live community calls so you don't feel like you're so alone attending a virtual summit. And you get all of this for free. Just head to brokentobeloved.org/summit to register and get your free ticket. If you're feeling overwhelmed or you don't think you'll have time to watch all the sessions, you can always get an all-access pass. You'll get access to the full library of sessions instead of just 3 or 4 a day, and you'll get them a full 24 hours ahead of the summit launch, along with bonus resources, session transcripts, and lifetime access to the recordings. Early bird pricing ends January 14th, which is today if it's release day at midnight Eastern Time, so be sure to get that price before it goes up to full price. Finally, if you're looking for a community and place to process your church harm, spiritual abuse, or religious trauma, I want to invite you to join us for the Through cohort. Applications will open next week during the summit, and you can join us for 8 weeks as I guide you through really practical ways to name and share what happened in your story, navigate your liminal spaces, and find practical tools to regulate your nervous system and rediscover and reclaim your belovedness. We've had over 80 people go through the cohort so far over the last 2 years. We've given over $9,000 away in scholarships for it, and you can join the waitlist today at brokentobeloved.org/through. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope it's been helpful. Here's to moving toward healing and wholeness together. I'll see you next time.